Hello and welcome to God and Country. Hope you guys are having a great day. The other day we did part 1 on the Constitution versus Sharia Law. Before I jump into part 2 today, I do want to ask you, if you have not already subscribed to our channel, I would encourage you to go in and subscribe to our channel. As I ask in every single episode, please share. It helps us get around the algorithm. The algorithm of social media does not like conversations like the one that we're going to have today. And so I always ask, to help get out our message is by sharing. And if you'll share, it'll help us whenever it comes, whether it's YouTube, whether it's on X, whether it's on, Facebook, Instagram, wherever you're watching this, Rumble. I would encourage you to copy, paste, and and share. And then, of course, if you're on Facebook, you can just hit the share button. But here we are on God and Country, talking about something that I believe is very important. The other day, we talked about the Constitution versus Sharia law, freedom, rights, and liberty versus religious rule, government control. This is part 2. The other day we did part 1. I want to make something very clear in the very beginning, because I want you to understand something, with this conversation. I am not against people. I love people. I pastor a church, and I try to reach people all the time. I have had debates with Muslims in mosque. I have seen Muslims accept Christ as a personal Savior. I mean, there's a lot of Muslims that I know and that I have conversations with, some even on a weekly basis. I have friends that have Muslims for their family. And so I know a lot of, I'm not going to sit out like I'm the smartest guy in the world whenever it comes to Islam or Muslim. I'm not. There's guys that have written books, and I've tried to read them, that know a whole lot more about Islam, Sharia law than I do. I have studied it just a little bit, and I have talked to many Muslims. And some people will say, Dan, not all Muslims are like that. And I would agree to an extent that not all Muslims are like these that we see in Dearborn, Michigan, that we see in other parts of the world, that we see in Europe. And I get that. But here's what I want to see from the Muslims that are here, is I want to see them coming out against and opposing Sharia law, because that is the problem. You cannot follow Islam. Let me put it like this. If you follow Islam, it leads to Sharia law. And so I'm seeing a lot of pushback on social media against, Islam and Sharia law, and there should be. There should be, because Sharia law cannot coexist with the Constitution. And we've talked about this, and we're going to talk about that more today, because there's a major difference whenever it comes to the Constitution versus Sharia law. I've seen people posted on social media, people that are not Muslims, that are being very demeaning and sarcastic to people like myself and others who are sounding the alarm whenever it comes to Islam. A couple of reasons. One, either that's just their personality, and maybe that's how they are, or two, they just don't understand what Islam truly is and what it will do to a nation. Maybe they haven't paid attention to what's happened in Iran or Egypt, or even what's happening in Europe right now. Because there is a major difference between Sharia law and the Constitution. A major difference. And so the Constitution, you have freedom, you have rights, you have liberty. Under Sharia law, you don't have those rights. Those rights are all controlled by their religion, by the Quran, by Muhammad, by divine revelation that was given to their prophet hundreds of years ago. And so there's a major difference between the Constitution and Sharia law. And so I want you to understand that I don't hate people, right? I want to see every Muslim in the world accept Christ as a personal Savior and follow after the Word of God, and not follow after Muhammad and the Quran. I would much rather see them follow after the teachings of Jesus and the Apostle Paul than follow after the teachings of their prophet Muhammad. And so that's what we talked about in part 1, and we're gonna kind of go back over it just a little bit, part 1, and then we'll talk more in depth today, getting into part 2, and then we'll have part 3. We're talking about two systems, we're talking about two futures, and you have to choose wisely. I understand that, whenever it comes to social media, sometimes posts don't come across the right way. But here's what I want you guys to understand something, okay, whenever it comes to Islam and Sharia law. And I have said this over and over again. I'm going to continue to say this. They are not here. Those that are pushing Muhammad's teachings and those that truly follow after the Quran, which is a very large, that's more in the majority than not, people that are following after the Quran and Sharia law and that want to implement that here in the United States of America. Now, there are a few Muslims that don't want to implement Sharia law. There are a few Muslims, they're not radical, and they don't want to do that to the United States of America. They enjoy their freedom, I guess you could say. And I'm not necessarily worried about them. But unfortunately, whenever you're fighting Islam and you're fighting Sharia law, it seems that those people, they just need to come out and renounce Islam and renounce the Sharia law and the Quran and then walk away from that if they don't truly believe that. And that's where I have a really hard time believing that in their heart that they don't believe that. They're saying some things, but they truly in their heart don't believe it, or they wouldn't be a Muslim. They wouldn't follow after Islam. And so you have to be real careful whenever you're having these conversations because, like I said earlier, I know some Muslims and they're good people. And I'm not necessarily concerned with them, even though I do want to see them walk away from Islam, right? I want to see them walk away from Islam. But at the end of the day, Islam and Sharia law will destroy this nation. So we must fight against it. We must talk about it. And we must educate people because there is a major difference between the Constitution and Sharia law. So let's jump into this and talk about, this particular subject, the Constitution versus Sharia law. Now, we've talked about, we defined the issue. Discussion is about Sharia law, Sharia as civil law, not peaceful Muslims practicing their faith privately. And so we talked about that. We're talking about religious freedom. That's what is under the Constitution. People may worship, preach, convert, and live by their conscience. You don't have to be a Baptist if you don't want to be a Baptist. You don't have to be a Catholic. You don't have to be anything under the Constitution. Under Sharia law, you have the government that is enforcing their religious commands on everyone. The Constitution allows the first, it allows religious freedom, and it condemns, it forbids the second. So we already talked about that, and then we talked about the authority, where authority comes from. Under the Constitution, the authority starts with we the people. Under Sharia law, it talks about, it comes from their Quran, it comes from Muhammad, is where it comes from. So we talked about that. And then we talked about freedom to change religion. We talked about how under the Constitution, you can change religion. Under Sharia law, you cannot change religion. And then we talked about free speech about religion. Under the Constitution, you can say whatever you want. Under Sharia law, you cannot say whatever you want. And so now we're going to talk about equal citizenship. And we talked about this just a little bit the other day. I'm going to talk about it just for a moment, and then we're going to move on. Equal citizenship. Under the Constitution, you have one citizenship under civil law. One. Equal protection applies to all. Rights do not depend on religion. So under the Constitution, I'm a Baptist and I have the same equal rights. Even Muslims have the same equal right that I have, as long as they're not pushing their Sharia law and trying to change or implement, that authority on everyone. Under the Constitution, they are protected. Pentecostals are protected under the Constitution. Catholics are protected under the Constitution. Atheists are protected under the Constitution. Everyone is protected under the Constitution to worship their God or to even believe that there isn't a God. And so you have that protection under the Constitution. Now, under Sharia, you have a system that may distinguish between religion, sex, or even status. Legal rights can differ by category under Sharia law. Civil standing may not be uniform. So what that means is, if I'm a Baptist, I don't have the rights or the equal protection that Muslims have under Sharia law. And that goes for women, that goes for, listen to me, that goes for homosexuals, that goes for lesbians, that goes for everyone. You do not have equal protection under Sharia law. Under the Constitution, we all have equal protection to worship God or to live out your life, as long as you're not hurting someone, to live out your life how you see fit. A Baptist, Muslim, Jew, and atheist walk into court. Under the Constitution, they stand before the same judge under the same law. That is not the same under Sharia law. When you go into court in Sharia law, if you're a woman, it's different for you than it is for a man. If you're a Baptist, it's different for you than it is for a Muslim. If you're a homosexual, it's different for you than someone who's not. And so under Sharia law, you do not have equal protection. It is not the same. It is not the same across the board. And so people say, well, here in America, we have the Constitution, so why do we even need to worry about this? And one reason why I've been talking about this and teaching on this is because I'm seeing what's happening in Michigan. I'm seeing what's happening in Texas. I'm seeing what's happening in Europe. And ladies and gentlemen, don't think that it's not going to come here to where they are not going to try to come in and take over and implement Sharia law. So you need to understand just how dangerous this is. You need to understand how dangerous Sharia law is. It is very, very dangerous. You do not have equal protection under Sharia law. You don't have it. Now, you do under the Constitution, but not under Sharia law. And so it's just how it is. I mean, and that's not my opinion. That's fact. That is fact. Hopefully you've read the Constitution. You know the Constitution. I'm not sure if you've read the Quran or Sharia law. I've read the Constitution. I've read the Quran. I understand Sharia law. And now I'm comparing the two. And I'm seeing that they are very, very much different. You do not have equal protection under Sharia law. Now let's talk about religion and government. Under the Constitution, there is no national religion. Okay? Government protects worship. Government stays neutral in civil law. And so what that means is that the United States of America, we have no national religion. If you want to go to a Baptist church, if you want, whatever church you want to go to, you can go to it, or you don't have to go to church at all under the Constitution. You have freedom to worship. You have freedom not to worship. At my church, you can come Sunday. You don't have to come Sunday. We're having church on Wednesday night. You can come. You don't have to come. We have 4 services a week. You can come to 1 service. You could come to 2 services. You could come to 3. You could come all to 4. It's up to you. Under Sharia law, you must pray 5 times a day. I mean, you must do some things. So, under Sharia, religion and state can be formally connected, and it will be connected 100%. 100%. Religious law can and will govern civil matters. Absolutely. Clerical interpretation may and it will influence courts. 100%. Under strict Sharia law. That is why in places like Egypt, if you're going to start a church, you have to get permission from the government to start a church. Under Sharia law, you have to get permission. In the United States of America, under the Constitution, you don't have to get permission. If you can start a church in your home if you want to. Even in places that are not under Sharia law, and we're going to talk about this later, even in places that are not necessarily under Sharia law, but are just under government control, like in China, you can't just go in there and start a church. You have to get permission. In a lot of countries in the world, North Korea, you can't have church in North Korea. They will kill you in North Korea. And so I'm not just picking on Sharia law. I'm talking about Sharia law right now because it is all over the national news. We see what's happening in Europe. We see what's happening here in our country. And so absolutely, I'm going to be talking about Sharia law and trying to educate people and teach people the difference between the two. Because, ladies and gentlemen, there's a major difference in the two. A church can preach, a mosque can preach, but neither gets to write America's criminal code. Why? Because we are under the Constitution. But under Sharia law, that's not true. The church, let me put it like this, the mosque, Sharia law, they can promote criminal code. Absolutely they can under Sharia law. And so that's important for you not to understand that there is a major, major difference. Now, how laws change. Under the Constitution, people can vote. Listen, we have the Senate, the House, and we can, me as a citizen, I can call my elected official, and I can say to my elected official, hey, I want, as the legislators, they can amend statutes, I want you to amend this statute, or I want you to put this law into effect. And so they write the law, they write the bill, it goes before the committee, they vote in the committee, then it goes to the floor for debate, and then they vote on the floor, and then once the governor signs off on it, it becomes law. That is how it works underneath the legislators amend statutes. Courts review constitutionally. We've seen the Supreme Court overturn Roe versus Wade. That made the states have the rights whether or not they were going to be pro-life or pro-choice. And so that goes to the Supreme Courts. Now listen to me very carefully. Under Sharia law, foundational sources are sacred. Core commands are not rewritten by voters. I'm talking about core commands from the Quran. Interpretation belongs to religious jurisprudence or to your religious leaders. Okay? Your religious leaders. That is who interprets the law. If there's bad law in Mississippi, we elect new legislators and repeal it. A claimed divine command is not handled the same way. Under Sharia law, it's not handled that way. And so that's just how it is. In Mississippi, we get to vote next year on legislators. We get to vote on a governor, lieutenant governor. Under Sharia law, that's not how it happens. Under Sharia law, you are not, if there's a bad law, you are not amending it. You are not changing it because it is divine. It is a divine command. And so that's important for you to understand that under Sharia law, laws are just not going to change the way that you and I would want them to change. It doesn't happen that way. It doesn't work that way under Sharia law. They have the control under Sharia law. And that's why we're having this conversation about the Constitution versus Sharia law. We the people versus Sharia law. It's the we the people versus the Quran. It's we the people versus Sharia. And so it's important for you and I to understand that whenever we're looking at it. And I want to talk about one more, number 7, and then I'm going to be done for today. And then we'll move on because I think this is very important. And so we'll come back and do a part 3. I don't like to go longer than 20 minutes. And so we'll come back to part 3 and we'll do a part 3. Under the Constitution, you have voluntary faith versus government force. So under the Constitution, and I know I've talked about this before, but this is so important to me, as a minister, is that I want you to understand that it's voluntarily. It's voluntary. You can go to church. You don't have to go to church. I see a lot of people talking about a lot of different things whenever it comes to their church that they used to go to or not attend. But the bottom line is you are not going there today because you didn't have to go there. It is not commanded that you go there. You can pick whatever church you want to go to. Now, I'm going to go to Community Baptist Church tonight. But honestly, if I didn't want to, one, I could just stay at home or I could go to another church. I could switch religions under the Constitution. Religion is chosen and practiced freely. Listen, there are some people that they're Catholic, Presbyterian, Methodist, Pentecostal, and they get to choose freely if they want to stay in that religion or if they want to switch religions. They get to pick that. Church discipline has no police power. So I cannot put you in jail. I can't. Now, if someone does something against a child, if someone does something in church that is illegal, I still can't put them in jail. But I will absolutely call the police and get the police involved because I don't have the right to put people in jail. But under Sharia law, they can. The religious leaders can't have you put in jail. We'll get to that in a minute. Government cannot force worship. The government cannot force worship. I can worship freely. I don't have to worship at all. But under Sharia law, it's different. Religious obligations may become legal duties, and they will become legal duties. Government can enforce conduct tied to religion. Choice can become compulsion. You no longer have a choice. You no longer have a choice under Sharia law. Women, you have to wear your headgear, wearing a hijab, or going to church should be voluntary. The moment government forces it, liberty becomes coercion. And so I want you to understand something, that whenever it comes to Sharia law, you no longer have rights as a citizen under the Constitution. You say, well, we don't have to worry about that in America because we have the Constitution. You let them continue to grow and you let them continue to elect people into office, you'll see the Constitution amended, you'll see the Constitution changed, and you and I might not see it in our lifetime, but in the next 50, 75 years, you can see this great nation fall under the influence of Sharia law if we're not careful. That's how we must push. That's how we must work and do all that we can to make sure that it never gets a stronghold here in America. That's why on God and Country, I will continue to talk, I will continue to teach, and I will continue to educate you and others about the dangers of Sharia law. And so we're going to continue to talk about that. This is part 2. We're going to talk about the Constitution versus Sharia law. We're going to have a part 3, and we're going to have this discussion and talk about freedom, rights, and liberty versus religious rule and government control. Because if we're not careful, and if we go to sleep at the wheel, you and I will see religion, Muslim, Islam. We will see Sharia law happen in America if we're not careful. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for watching. If you haven't already subscribed to the channel, I would encourage you to do so. If you haven't already shared, I would encourage you to share as well. If you have any questions, please comment, send me a message. We'll try to answer any questions that you might have concerning Islam versus Christianity or Sharia law versus the Constitution. May God bless you, and may God continue to bless the great United States of America.